I stared at the document on my laptop screen, my hands shaking so hard I could barely read the numbers. $120,000. For 10 years. My mother-in-law's name was printed right there in the loan agreement, and my husband's signature was already on the line below it. I felt the room tilt. That's when everything clicked into place. All those small moments, all those conversations I'd half listened to, suddenly made terrible sense. I looked up from the screen and caught my reflection in the dark window behind my desk. I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. She looked terrified. She looked betrayed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up 3 years to when everything was actually good. My name is Ashley, and I married Michael 10 years ago in a small ceremony at the Botanical Gardens in Portland. Michael was kind, steady, the kind of guy who remembered to ask about my day and actually listened to the answer. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. I work as a graphic designer from home, and Michael's a project manager at a construction firm. After the first few years of scraping by in a cramped apartment downtown, we finally saved enough for a down payment on a real house. The house is a 1970s ranch on Maple Street, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, with the kind of foundation issues that keep you humble and a backyard big enough for the garden I've always wanted. We closed on it 4 years ago, and I remember standing in the empty living room, Michael's arm around my waist, both of us just breathing in the possibility of it all. Our place. Ours. His mother, Linda, had been skeptical about the purchase from the start. 30-year mortgage at your age? She'd said during that first dinner visit. You could have invested that money smarter. Linda is the type of woman who has opinions about everything. Your career choices, your haircut, the way you season chicken. She doesn't mean to be cruel exactly. She's just always been someone who needs to be the smartest person in the room. Michael is an only child, which means Linda has always been a permanent fixture in our lives. She lives about 20 minutes away in a retirement community called Oakmont Hills, a place with manicured lawns and a clubhouse where she plays bridge every Thursday. She calls at least twice a week, usually around dinner time, and she shows up unannounced on Saturday mornings with grocery store flowers and a list of things she thinks we're doing wrong. But Michael loves her. That's the thing. He's patient with her in a way I've never quite managed. He'll sit and listen to her stories about the neighborhood gossip, about her book club drama, about some slight she received at the community center. I'd started to accept that this was just how it was. Linda was part of the package, and if I wanted Michael, I had to accept his mother too. 2 years ago, Linda started having health problems. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to rattle her. High blood pressure, some arthritis, a couple of falls that scared her more than they should have. Michael became even more attentive, if that was possible. He'd drive over to check on her, help her with yard work, make sure she was taking her medications. I thought it was sweet, honestly. This is what you do for your parents when they start getting older. This is what it means to be a good son. Then, about 8 months ago, things shifted. Linda started talking about money more openly. She'd mention, in this casual way that wasn't casual at all, that her retirement savings weren't what she'd hoped. She'd invested poorly in the 90s, she said. The market had hurt her more than most people. She was still fine, she'd insist, but she was being more careful these days. I didn't think much of it. Plenty of people worry about money, especially when they're retired. Michael would reassure her that she was okay, that she had her Social Security, that Oakmont Hills wasn't going anywhere. But I could see it bothered him. He'd get this crease between his eyebrows when she brought it up. Last month, Michael had asked me to come sit with him in the kitchen one evening. He had that same crease between his eyebrows. He looked exhausted. "Mom's having a harder time than she's let on," he'd said, turning his coffee cup in circles on the table. "She wants to stay at Oakmont Hills, but the fees are going up. She's worried she won't be able to afford it." "Okay," I said carefully. "What does she want to do about it?" She asked if we could help. She was thinking maybe a small loan, just to get through the next few years until her situation stabilizes. I remember the feeling that washed over me then, a mixture of sympathy and dread. "How small?" I asked. He wouldn't meet my eyes. She said maybe 30,000. Over 5 years. I had to sit down for that one, even though I was already sitting. $30,000. That wasn't small. That was my entire emergency fund. That was the renovation we'd been planning for the kitchen. That was security. Michael, I said, keeping my voice level, we don't have $30,000 to just give away. It's not giving away. She said she'd pay us back, with interest. Your mom doesn't have $30,000 in liquid assets. Where is she going to get the money to pay us back? He finally looked at me, and his eyes were so sad. She asked if maybe we could just not worry about the interest part, and maybe extend the timeline. I remember standing up then, walking to the window above the sink, looking out at the dark backyard. Our backyard. The one we'd mortgaged ourselves to the hilt for. I need to think about this, I told him. But that was a month ago, and I guess I should have been paying closer attention, because Michael had apparently been thinking about it plenty. While I was focused on a big client project, while I was distracted, while I wasn't watching, he'd been having conversations with his mother. He'd been working up the numbers, and he'd apparently decided that 30,000 wasn't enough. I found the document by accident. Michael had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower. An email notification popped up from something called e-sign documents. I shouldn't have clicked on it. I know that now. But I did. And there it was. A 10-year loan agreement. $120,000. Interest-free. From us to Linda. With payment terms that somehow required us to cover the fees at Oakmont Hills directly if she couldn't make a payment, which meant we'd be paying for her housing regardless. My husband had signed it. I was still staring at the document when he came downstairs, his hair wet, a towel around his waist. He saw me at the counter, and the blood drained from his face. Ashley, what the hell is this? I held up the laptop. I can explain. You signed a $120,000 agreement with your mother, without talking to me, without discussing it. How did you even... Where did this number come from? He stood there, dripping water onto our kitchen floor, and I watched him struggle to find words. She said she needed more, he finally said quietly, for her care, for the future. She's scared, Ash. She doesn't want to end up in some state facility. She wants to stay at Oakmont Hills, where she has her friends, where she's comfortable. That's not our responsibility. My voice was getting louder, but I couldn't stop it. Michael, that's 4 times what you told me she needed, and you signed it without me. We're married. We have joint finances. How could you possibly sign a 10-year loan agreement without... Because I knew you'd say no, he said, and the quiet resignation in his voice somehow made it worse. I stared at him. I waited for him to take it back, to say he'd made a mistake, to say he'd cancel it immediately. He didn't say any of those things. We need to talk about this, I said finally. Properly. Tonight. After work. But as I walked back upstairs to my office, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs, I realized something that chilled me even more than the loan itself. I had no idea what my husband was actually capable of, and I had a terrible feeling that whatever came next was going to be much, much worse than the number on that screen. That evening, we sat across from each other at the kitchen table like 2 strangers. Michael had changed into jeans and a faded Oregon State hoodie. The normalcy of it made me angrier somehow. He looked so ordinary, so incapable of what he'd actually done. I need you to tell me everything, I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised me. Not the version you think will make me less angry. The whole thing. How much you owe your mother. What you promised her, when this started, all of it. Michael stared at his hands for a long moment. It wasn't supposed to get this big, he finally said. That's not an answer. He took a breath. Mom called me about 8 months ago. She was crying. She said she'd made some bad decisions with her investments, and her monthly income wasn't covering her expenses at Oakmont Hills anymore. She was scared she'd have to move into some assisted living facility in the county system. She didn't want that. Okay, so you offered her money. I offered to help. I said maybe 5,000 to get her through a rough patch. But then, he looked up at me, and his eyes were red. Then she said that wasn't going to be enough. She'd done the math. She needed about 40,000 just to cover the next 5 years of increased fees and to build a cushion for medical stuff. And she asked if we could do it as a loan so she wouldn't feel like charity. I felt my stomach twist. 40,000, not 30, 40. When did you change it to 120? I asked quietly. That's not. He stopped. He ran his hand through his hair. Last month, she called me again. She said her doctor told her she needs to prepare for potential long-term care. She's terrified, Ashley. She's really terrified. And she asked if we could cover more. She said she'd pay us back. She just needed the security of knowing it was there. And you just agreed? Without talking to me? Without even asking? Because I knew what you'd say. His voice came up then, frustrated and desperate. I knew you'd say no. I knew you'd point out all the logical reasons why it was a bad idea. And maybe you'd be right. But she's my mother, and she's scared, and I couldn't just sit there and tell her no while she falls apart. I stood up from the table and walked to the counter. My hands were shaking. I gripped the edge so hard my knuckles went white. Michael, we don't have $120,000. Even if we wanted to give it to her, we don't have it. Our liquid savings is about $40,000. Everything else is tied up in the house, in retirement accounts we can't touch without massive penalties. What were you thinking? Where did you think this money was going to come from? He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was very small. I was going to take out a home equity line of credit against the house. The room tilted. I had to sit back down. You were going to put a second mortgage on our house, without talking to me. I haven't done it yet, he said quickly. I was going to talk to you. I was going to explain everything, and then we'd decide together. But you already signed the agreement with your mother. You already committed us to repaying $120,000. How is that deciding together? He didn't have an answer. We sat in silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only 5 minutes. I need to see the full agreement, I said finally. Every page. And I need to know everything else. Has she asked for anything more? Are there other conversations I don't know about? Michael got his laptop and opened the document. We went through it line by line. The loan was structured to begin disbursing immediately, $10,000 per month for the next 12 months, then the remainder in a lump sum. The repayment period was indeed 10 years, starting 6 months after the final disbursement. There were no late fees. There was no interest. It was essentially us giving his mother money on a schedule that was convenient for him to explain to me. Has she talked to you about anything else? I pressed. Any other financial problems? Michael hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. What, Michael? She mentioned something about her car. The transmission might be going. She was worried about the cost of a replacement. I closed the laptop. I couldn't even look at him. I'm going to bed, I said. Don't follow me. I need to think. I lay awake for most of the night, staring at the ceiling of our bedroom. The bedroom in the house we'd fought so hard to buy. The house that was apparently about to become collateral for my husband's mother's retirement lifestyle. My mind kept circling around the same terrible questions. How had I married someone capable of this? How had I not seen it? And what was I supposed to do now? By morning, I'd made a decision. I called my best friend Jennifer. I need to see you, I told her. Today. It's important. Jennifer owns a boutique yoga studio downtown, but she closed it early for me. We sat in the empty studio at 11 in the morning, and I told her everything. I watched her face as she processed it. He did what? She said when I finished. Signed a $120,000 agreement with his mother, without telling me. And he was planning to take out a second mortgage on our house to fund it. Jennifer stood up and started pacing. Okay. Ashley, this is serious. Like potentially marriage-ending serious. You know that, right? I did know that. That was what terrified me. What do I even do? I asked. Do I call a lawyer? Do I tell him I want a separation? Do I just refuse to sign the HELOC paperwork? You do all of that, Jennifer said, but you do it carefully. Ashley, listen to me. You need to talk to an attorney before you do anything else, not to threaten Michael, but to understand your options, to understand what happens if you refuse to co-sign a HELOC, what happens if you want to protect your assets, what your rights are. I don't want a divorce, I heard myself say. I don't, but I can't let this happen. I can't let him mortgage our house for his mother. Then you need professional advice, real advice, from someone who knows family law. I found a family law attorney named David Chen through a friend of a friend. His office was in a downtown building with a view of the river. I sat across from him on a gray afternoon and laid out the whole situation. He listened without interrupting, taking notes in a leather-bound pad. When I finished, he set down his pen and looked at me carefully. Here's what you need to understand, he said. You and your husband have joint finances. He can't unilaterally take out a HELOC against the house without your signature. If he tries to, you can file a complaint with the bank, and they'll require both signatures. However, if you refuse to sign, that doesn't erase the loan agreement he already signed with his mother. That's a separate contract between him and her. So I'm stuck either way. Not exactly. You have options. First, you can refuse to co-sign the HELOC, which prevents the loan from being funded immediately. Second, you can demand that he dissolve the agreement with his mother, which, by the way, is probably not enforceable against you jointly anyway, since you didn't sign it. Third, you can consult with a mediator about restructuring your finances. And fourth, if your marriage isn't salvageable, we can discuss divorce and asset protection. The word divorce hung in the air between us. Is it that serious? I asked. David leaned back in his chair. That depends on you. Is this a one-time betrayal that you can work through with counseling and better communication? Or is this part of a pattern of financial infidelity and disrespect for your joint decision-making? I can't answer that for you. But I can tell you that a lot of marriages don't survive financial deception, especially when it involves putting the family home at risk. I paid his retainer and left his office feeling like I'd stepped into a different universe. One where my marriage might actually end. One where I might have to fight for my own financial security against my own husband. That night, when Michael came home from work, I told him I'd seen a lawyer. The color drained from his face. What? I needed to understand my legal options. I needed to know what I could and couldn't be forced to do. And I needed to know what would happen to our assets if things escalate. You're talking like you're planning to leave me. I don't know what I'm planning, I said, but I know I'm not signing a HELOC. I'm not putting our house at further risk, and I'm not going to sit back and let you make unilateral financial decisions that affect both of us. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to call your mother today and tell her that the agreement she signed with you isn't valid because I didn't sign it, and that we need to have a family conversation about what we can actually afford to help her with. And if you don't do that, I'm going to consult with my attorney about filing a formal complaint with the bank and protecting my assets. Ashley, you're being unreasonable. No, I'm being practical. I'm being protective of our home and our future. And I'm being honest about the fact that I'm losing trust in you very quickly. So you have a choice. You can either work with me to fix this, or you can find out what it looks like when I stop trying to protect this marriage. I saw something shift in his face then. A flicker of fear. Or maybe it was realization. He finally understood that I wasn't just going to accept this, that I wasn't just going to be collateral damage to his guilt and his need to rescue his mother. Let me think about what to do, he said quietly. You have until tomorrow, I told him. That night, I lay in bed and realized something darker, something that had been creeping up on me since I found that document. I didn't recognize my husband anymore, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. The next morning, Michael didn't call his mother. Instead, he left for work early without saying goodbye. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee growing cold, watching the clock. By noon, I hadn't heard from him. By 5 o'clock, I realized he wasn't going to do what I'd asked. He was choosing avoidance over action. He was choosing his mother over his marriage. I picked up my phone and called David Chen's office. His assistant scheduled me for an emergency consultation the following morning. Then I did something I'd been avoiding. I called my mother. "I need to tell you something," I said when she answered. "And I need you to listen without interrupting." I told her everything. The loan, the HELOC, Michael's deception, the attorney. She was quiet for a long moment after I finished. "Do you want to save this marriage?" she finally asked. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I don't know who my husband is anymore." "Then you need to protect yourself first. Everything else comes after that. Do you understand?" I did understand. What I didn't understand was how to do it without destroying everything. That night, Michael came home around 7. He looked exhausted, but also resolved in a way that frightened me. He walked into the kitchen where I was making dinner, a habit from before, when we were still a real couple. "I talked to Mom," he said. I turned from the stove. "You did?" "I told her we couldn't do the full amount. I said maybe 50,000 instead, over 7 years. I set down the spatula. "Michael, I told you to dissolve the agreement entirely, not to negotiate a different number." "That's not realistic, Ashley. She needs help. We can do 50,000. We can make that work." "No, we can't. And more importantly, I told you what needed to happen, and you did something else. Again. Do you understand how many times you've lied to me now? Do you understand that you're still not listening?" He moved toward me, his hands up in a placating gesture. "I'm trying to find a middle ground. I'm trying to compromise." "You can't compromise on a contract you signed without me. There is no middle ground. Either you dissolve the agreement with your mother, or I'm filing for divorce." The words hung between us. I'd said them. I'd actually said them out loud. And I meant them. Michael's face went very still. "You don't mean that." "I do. I absolutely do. And I mean this too. I'm not signing a HELOC under any circumstances. I'm not putting this house at further risk. And if you try to do this without me, I will file a complaint with the bank, and I will consult with my attorney about protecting my assets. You can choose to work with me to fix this, or you can find out what happens when I stop trying to save us." "So you're really doing this? You're really throwing away 10 years of marriage because of $50,000? "I'm not throwing away anything. You did this. You threw away my trust. You threw away our partnership. You made a $120,000 commitment without me. And then, when I asked you to fix it, you just came up with a slightly smaller number instead. That's not compromise, Michael. That's negotiating how deep the hole you're digging is going to be." He turned away from me. "I need to think about this." "You have until tomorrow," I said. "Same deadline I gave you yesterday, but this time I mean it." He didn't sleep in our bed that night. I heard him moving around downstairs, heard the television come on and off, heard him pacing. I lay awake upstairs, my heart broken, but my resolve solid. I'd crossed a line. I'd made a threat I was willing to carry out. And now we would see what my husband actually valued. The next morning, he was gone. His car was in the driveway, but Michael wasn't in the house. I found a note on the kitchen counter, written in his precise handwriting. "Ashley, I've gone to Mom's. I need to think about what you said and what I need to do. I don't want a divorce. I don't think you do either, even if you think you do right now. I'm going to call a family mediator. I think we need professional help to work through this. I'll be back tomorrow evening. We can talk then. I love you. I know you don't believe that right now, but I do. Michael." I held the note in my hands, and I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet. But the smallest crack in my anger, a space where sadness could seep in. He'd gone to his mother's, which meant one of two things. He was going to ask her for help in convincing me to back down, or he was finally going to tell her that this wasn't going to work the way she'd hoped. I didn't have to wait long to find out. Linda called me at 3 in the afternoon. "Michael told me what you said to him," she began without preamble. "I think you're being unreasonable." "Hello to you too, Linda. Don't be flippant with me. Michael is a good son, and he's trying to help his mother. That's not a character flaw, that's a virtue, and you're punishing him for it. I took a breath. I'd been preparing for this conversation in my head for days. Linda, I'm not punishing Michael for being a good son. I'm protecting my family's financial security. Your son made a commitment to you without including me in the decision. He signed a document that could have bankrupted us. And when I asked him to fix it, he tried to renegotiate instead. That's not about being a good son. That's about making decisions unilaterally in a marriage, and I won't accept that. You married into this family, Linda said, her voice tight. That means you have obligations to help family members in need. I married your son, not you. And yes, I want to help you if I can, but not at the expense of my own financial security, not at the expense of my marriage, and not by allowing your son to make major financial decisions without me. He's scared, Linda said, and her voice wavered slightly. He's scared I'm going to lose my home. I've worked my entire life, and I'm terrified that I'm going to end up in some awful facility where nobody visits and nobody cares. Your husband loves me enough to help. Why can't you? And there it was, the thing I'd suspected all along. Linda wasn't just asking for money. She was asking Michael to choose her over me. She was asking him to prove his love by sacrificing his marriage. I do want to help you, I said carefully, but not like this. Michael and I need to have a conversation about what we can actually afford, what we're willing to contribute, and how we're going to make that decision together. Not as a loan you'll never repay, not as a contract signed in secret, but as a genuine discussion between a married couple about supporting a family member. If you're willing to have that conversation, with both of us together, then we can figure something out. But if you're going to keep pressuring Michael to choose you over his marriage, then I can't help you. I won't. Linda was quiet for a long moment. I didn't realize this was about that, she finally said. It's entirely about that. This was never about the money. This was about Michael being unable to say no to you, and you being unable to respect that he's married now. That changes things. I see, she said quietly. I hope you do. Because if Michael comes home tonight and tells me that you've convinced him to fight me on this, that you've told him to choose between us, then this marriage is over, and you'll have made that choice for him. I hung up the phone before she could respond. Michael came home at 7 o'clock. He looked like he'd been crying. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd had so many conversations over the years, and he said the words I needed to hear. I called a family law mediator. I have an appointment for us tomorrow evening, and I'm going to call Mom tonight and tell her that the agreement she signed with me isn't valid, that we need to start over with a real conversation about what we can actually afford. I felt my throat tighten. Are you doing this because you want to, or because you're afraid I'll leave? Does it matter? Yes, it matters to me. He looked at me for a long moment. I'm doing it because you were right. I was making decisions based on guilt and fear, not based on what was actually best for us, and I was doing it without my wife. That's not a marriage. That's just me using marriage as an excuse to avoid having hard conversations with my mother. Okay, I said softly. That's good. That's actually good. He made the call to Linda that night while I sat in the living room, pretending to read but actually listening to every word. I heard him tell her that the loan agreement was no longer valid. I heard him explain that we needed to have a real family conversation about what we could contribute. I heard him tell her, in a voice that was simultaneously sad and resolute, that if she couldn't accept help on those terms, then he couldn't help her. The mediator's name was Dr. Patricia Walsh. Her office was warm and neutral, with soft lighting and uncomfortable chairs that forced you to sit up straight. She spent the first 20 minutes with just Michael and me, establishing ground rules. No insults, no accusations, just honest communication about needs and boundaries. This is not about winning, she told us. This is about understanding each other and finding a path forward that both of you can live with. The mediator worked with us for 3 sessions over the next 2 weeks. In those sessions, Michael talked about his fear of abandonment, his guilt over not being able to save his mother from her own mistakes, his sense that being a good son meant sacrificing his own happiness. I talked about my fear of financial instability, my resentment at not being treated as an equal partner, my grief over discovering that I'd married someone I didn't fully know. By the third session, we'd found something, not perfect, but real. Michael and I would contribute $20,000 to help his mother with the next 2 years of Oakmont Hills fees. This would be a gift, not a loan. We would not take out a HELOC. We would not put the house at risk. And once that $20,000 was gone, Linda would need to figure out other solutions, whether that meant downsizing her lifestyle, moving to a less expensive facility, or working with a financial advisor to better manage her retirement. We also agreed to see a couples therapist, someone who could help us rebuild trust and learn how to make joint decisions in a healthier way. Linda accepted the terms. She wasn't happy about it, but she accepted it. And something shifted in our relationship with her after that. She became less demanding, more aware of her place in our family structure. She started seeing a financial advisor. She began having realistic conversations about her future. 3 months later, Michael and I renewed our vows in a small ceremony at the same botanical gardens where we'd gotten married. Not because we were trying to fix things with grand gestures, but because we wanted to mark a moment where we'd chosen each other consciously, deliberately, after nearly losing everything. Jennifer was there. David Chen was there. My parents and Michael's father came. Even Linda came, and she cried when we exchanged rings. That night, after everyone had left and we were alone in our kitchen again, Michael took my hand. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not giving up on me, for loving me enough to fight for us, for being willing to say no even when it would have been easier to just accept everything and let me destroy us." I squeezed his hand. "I learned something through all of this," I told him. "I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their worst impulses. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for a marriage is demand that it be real. Not comfortable, not easy, but real." We stood there together in the kitchen of the house we'd fought so hard to keep, and I realized that we'd actually made it through. Not unscathed, the scars were still there, and would probably always be there, but we'd made it through. And maybe that was enough, maybe that was actually everything.